Good afternoon and a warm welcome to our show. This is Smart Nation and You 2021 Let's Talk. It's good to see all of you here this afternoon, as well as a shout out to those who are watching us on Zoom, Facebook Live and MeWatch. Now this Smart Nation and You Let's Talk is a series of panel discussions where we're looking at how COVID-19 has impacted all our lives and to ask what's next. What does it mean on Singapore's journey towards a smart nation? Now, COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the way Singaporeans live, work and play. Those of us who could pivot and adopt digital technology very quickly moved with the times. But there were those who faced challenges and therefore could not quite keep up with the challenges that COVID posed to us. This panel discussion today is going to tap views on how government, private sectors, as well as people sectors can work together to drive greater inclusion so that all of us can thrive, can benefit in a shared digital future. I'm Genevieve Wu, your moderator this afternoon, and it is my privilege to be joined by Mr. S. Iswaran, Minister for Communications and Information, Mr. Yuen Kuan Moon, Group CEO of Singtel, Dr. Carol Soon, a Senior Research Fellow, IPS, and Carol's research interest includes media literacy, public education and inclusion, as well as media literacy, as I said. And last but not least, our young gentleman here, Mr. Au Jia Rong, who is the co-founder of Noggin AI and Honorary Secretary of IT Youth Council Singapore. Now to our topic today, digital tsunami leaving no one behind. I think one of the big things that COVID-19 showed up was the digital haves and the have-nots and the gap that's between them. Let me pose a question first to Minister. To you, what was the biggest gap that you noticed between the digital have and have-nots? What surprised you? What struck you?
Well, I think any change is always going to create divisions in society, and when the change happens very fast, then it exacerbates those divisions. So I think in the case of COVID, digitalization that probably would have taken a few years to occur, all occurred in the space of months. And the key difference, I think, was, before COVID, a lot of the work had been about raising awareness and trying to persuade people. So, I describe it to my colleagues as, before COVID, it was like digitalization, you used to get a polite hearing, and we talk about it's a nice to have, maybe a good to have. Now, with COVID, it became a need to have and a must have. So I think the big shift, in my opinion, the watershed has been the change in awareness level, knowledge and awareness of the digitalization. But that then leads to the point about the gap that you talk about, because from becoming aware to being able to act on it requires a certain amount of access, capability, knowledge, and the ability to navigate. And that's where it starts to differentiate itself, because there are some, whether you're talking about citizens, workers, or enterprises, who are well equipped, or at least have the basics to start the ball rolling and move and adapt. And then there are others who actually need a great deal of help and hand-holding. And so I think that's what's become the most sharp. And many of the responses we have mounted has been born out of that recognition.
Right. Moon, what was your experience in that point?
Well, I guess the digital divide always existed. I think it just got compounded and compressed with the COVID situation. I would classify it probably under three categories. Firstly, the financial means to bridge the gap. And secondly, the skills to do it. And thirdly, probably the least talked about, but most important, is the mindset to want to overcome the gap. So from the individuals to the I would say the population who are vulnerable, as well as to the SMEs. I guess when you look at these three aspects of it, the biggest one would be mindset change, because now, as the minister has said, it is no longer good to have. It becomes must have. And then suddenly they realize that, oh, I've got the knowledge gap, I've got the skill gap. And then you move on and say, beyond that, I've got a financial gap. So it just gets tougher and tougher for people who do not have it.
Right, and the pandemic really underlined the gaps in it. I mean, Carol, you have done some studies on public education and inclusion on the digital journey. Can you add on to this?
I think for a very long time, whenever we talk about digital divide, and this is not just the literature in Singapore, but literature everywhere, the conventional rhetoric and concerns, and rightly so, have been the divide between the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
And I think regardless of how developed or undeveloped an economy is, we see that problem everywhere. Right. So, for example, I think, and like what Mr. Moon said, Mr. Yuan said, COVID-19 certainly shone a harsher spotlight on this. I mean, if we look at the figures that were released by WEF and UNESCO last year, talked about how with COVID-19, I think up to about 70% of the countries enforced stay-at-home restrictions to varying extents. Right. We saw 70% take-up rate in terms of digital tools. And in fact, the use of virtual collaboration tools went up by 600%. But if you look at the figures, only 50% of the global student population was able to learn from home. And the rest could not do so simply because they did not have the device. And if we look at the case in Singapore, I think we are certainly in a much better stage because of very proactive policies and also private and people sector initiatives. But we still see that gap, right? Talking about comparing the use of the internet as well as ownership of PCs between, say, 1 and 2 room flat dwellers and public housing and other apartment dwellers, we still see some of these gaps. So clearly there's a lot of work to be done still, certainly in our context. And I think the other very pertinent sharp gap, like what our minister mentioned, is the participatory gap. So recently we just finished a research that specifically looked at Singaporeans' ability, to discern false information from real information, and we saw similar divisions along SES and H, right? So it tells us that the classic divisions do not apply only to access to hardware, but also to people's software capabilities. And I think that's something that we should really think very hard about.
Okay, so on that thought, let me turn to Jia Rongxi. We talked about the age as a factor in the gap. And if you can represent the youth voice for us, what does that mean to you, the digital have and have not in your group?
So I think from the youth point of view, right, one example of the difference between the digital haves and the have-nots is actually timely information, right? So the ability for us, during the COVID-19 period, circuit breaker, right, we have our parents actually coming to us saying, oh, there is 10 cases today, there's 20 cases today, but actually we already know this beforehand because of, GovSG's WhatsApp notification. Right, so I think that is one of the things that we noticed. On top of that, there is also the availability of true information as well. Right, so how accurate are these informations? Right, so from the youth point of view, we actually have this ahead of the curve. Yeah, so that's something that.
I think another factor that the pandemic threw up was unequal access to a digital world. Minister, maybe you can chime in on this. What does this mean? I mean, for us, today we're talking about smart nation. An unequal access or opportunity, how does that impact us moving forward together as one nation?
So I think if we just build on the earlier conversation, it goes from a knowledge and awareness gap to access, the ability to actually have the devices and the connectivity. And then it's which is a function of both technology and affordability. And then it goes to the last part, which is the comfort level to navigate. And it's not just about learning one-off, but going beyond. So when you think about this, one of the areas which I've noticed is that we've had to focus a great deal, not just on making it more available for people to access. So families, for example, we've had programs which help families with children have computers for home-based work and so on. But when you have 3 children studying from home, it's very different from when they only needed it for the occasional homework exercise. Yes. Now everything has gone home-based learning. So it changes the requirement, both in terms of the hardware and the connectivity. So whether it's your broadband sort of access, etc., and so on. So that's one part of it. And then it's compounded by the fact that parents were also working from home. So I think that was an area we had to do quite a bit of work on, helping the families and so on, in a sense, patch into this new environment and see how they can do it. But it also equally applies to enterprises. Because, enterprises, our commitment has always been that regardless of your stage of development, you can be a startup, you can be a scale-up, you can be a micro SME, you can be a big company. We are prepared to work with you and helping you adopt the technology. But what it did mean, though, is you need different types of solutioning to be available to them. Otherwise, they're not able to come onto that platform and start the journey. And I think this is where, you on the one hand, you need more curated plug-and-play type solutions.
Yes.
But you also need then the ability to do more customized solutioning as well and helping them journey along. Because otherwise it's, you buy it, you use it, but after that what do you do? And they're stuck and they don't know what else to do. And this is where our partners in the industry like the telcos and others are very important as well. So overall I would say this has been one of the things that we need to work on and continue to sustain, that in terms of moving from awareness and knowledge to access and then to sustained usage and growth. This is going to be the journey that we need to continue to work on.
Sure. Now, Minister talked about, I suppose, corporates and chime in. We're talking about a community, an ecosystem, I guess we need to build. And it's not just top-down driven. Yes, of course, government leads the way, but you also need the collaboration of partners. Moon, would you like to chime in?
Well, I think, you talk about unequal access, to digital and technology. Minister talked about, a family having to share a computer. I don't think it's just about the hardware. I think there's also the practical side of things. Imagine a family with 3 children and both parents working from home. It's purely management of noise. When 5 people are on a video conference at the same time, how do you manage that environment? And then you end up having, everybody will have to invest on a headset, to overcome that problem. So I think there's also the practical side beyond the home into the offices. And into the offices, I'd like to share an example of, in my own company in Singtel, we did a survey and asked our employees how many of them like to work from home and, work in the office. The results were quite different than what we expected. There were some surprises. We thought everybody preferred to work at home, but it's not true. And one of the distribution curve shows that the older generation, female generation, actually prefers to come back to the office. And we were quite surprised and said, why? And when we go deeper and say, the wives working from home said, when I'm working from home, my husband expects me to continue to serve him. So this goes back to my first question of mindset, right? We need to change the mindset. I'm working from home doesn't mean I'm not working. I'm still working. So don't expect me to do the household chores or whatever, as though it's on the weekend. So I think some of these are practical challenges. And then when we survey, a lot of the younger employees say, I want to work from home. And we said, why? Why do you want to work from home? You lose the collaboration, you lose the interaction, you lose the social part of work. And they come back and they say, it is really because in the office, we have social distance restriction. I can't use the gathering place, I can't go to the pantry, I can't eat together. If you ask me to go back to the office, I probably have to put the mask for 8 hours and sit in front of the terminal and still do Zoom calls. So what's the point of going back to the office? I'd rather stay at home. So I think there's a lot of practical issues when we start to drill down further and say, is it an unequal access situation? But in Singapore, generally, we have got very good access. Everyone needs internet connections. There is internet connection. And even if you don't have, you can use your mobile and you will be covered. So I don't think it is purely a physical infrastructure gap. There's a lot more we need to do to overcome the awareness, the gap, the skills gap, as well as the mindset. I think that is more important.
That's true. I mean, I see a lot of nodding heads in our audience. So let me just throw it over to the audience right now. I guess, men, are you a little bit more, are you guilty of what Moon has just said. Yes, yes. Oh, I see. Does anybody want to share? Or I suppose the ladies in the audience then, do you feel that there was an unequal distribution that actually the pandemic actually turned up? Anybody would like to share a story at this point? No? Not quite too shy? Okay, we'll warm up a little bit later. But a shout out to our Zoom and Facebook audience out there. The floor is actually open for questions for you to send in on Zoom as well, and we'll take them as they come along. So I encourage you to send your questions, and we have the best minds in the room, so we'll address as much as we can. All right. Singapore is credited as having one of the highest digital penetration rates in the world, 4.9 million thereabouts in hard numbers. But it's actually 85% of our population, right? And that's massive. But gaps remain. I want to go back to gaps. I want to spend some time a little bit about that. And let's identify these. Now, Carol, in one of your papers, you wrote a little bit about participatory gaps. Can you just outline this for us, and we can all jump into comment on these gaps?
So essentially, participatory gap refers to people's differentiated ability to fully use or exploit a technology, whether it's a device or a software or whatever they do when they go to the internet. So typically, when we look at online participation, for instance, the model that best describes people who are online is that of a pyramid, right? Where you have the base, the middle structure, and then the summit, the apex. So at the base is what we see 90% of online users, and that could be many of us in this room, and 90% of online users tend to adopt a very passive role or position when they're online. In other words, they could just be perusing information, they could just be lurking, right? And then you have the other 9% who are slightly more active contributors who perhaps post and create some content once in a while. And then you have that 1%, right? These are really active, frequent contributors, content producers. So clearly it tells you the gaps. And I think the fact that they are different could be because of a few things. One, certainly because of their interests and pre-existing disposition, to want to express themselves, to want to create content, to want to influence public opinion, for instance. But I think a lot of it also has to do with their innate or their socialized environment and their capability. So earlier Jia Rong was talking about, say, youth. I think even among youths, we don't want to assume that all of them are savvy and are discerning. Right, so in the study that we did, we found some differential capabilities among youths as well. So I think that's also the other very big challenge for policymakers, for representatives from the private sector and the people sector. It's no longer as simple as honing or zooming in one particular demographic, like people, for instance, people from low SES or seniors, It's also within these pockets, very different sheer ability, right, to fully harness technology. So another piece of work that we did looked at how children and youth aged 7 to 18 use information technology for work, study, learning. And we found this, right? So clearly, children in households where parents were more engaged, had more disposable income, had the professional expertise to guide them in their usage. They were a bit more savvy when it came to using technology. They probably were also a bit more knowledgeable as to how to avoid some of the pitfalls and cesspits in cyberspace. But you will have children from families where parents are busy, or from households where there's a single parent trying to juggle childcare and work employment. They are in a very different situation. We literally had a single mom, telling us, I don't care what my son does. He's at home, it doesn't matter so much to me that he's spending hours on the phone playing games, because I'd rather he do that within the confines, within the safety of home, okay, than venturing out and I don't know whom he's mixing with. So these are some lived realities that we have to think about.
That's a lot to unpack there, Carol. I mean, Minister, would you want to chime in? I mean, we talk about gaps. Maybe we'll take it one at a time. Maybe income. Clearly, that was one. Children from so lower income families, even single income, assuming that also falls under that bracket.
Yeah. So I think gaps. There are many ways of looking at it.
Yes.
I think from a social point of view, families, low-income families and children there, and how they're able to get access is what we discussed earlier. But if you look at our society as a broader point, seniors and their participation can also be a gap.
Yes.
But I do want to very quickly dispel the notion that somehow seniors are not tech savvy, because there are many seniors who put us to shame, I think. I've
Yes.
met them and I've learned from them and been embarrassed by them, frankly. But I think at the same time, if you look at it from the point of view of community and enterprises, in the community, the micro SMEs, our hawkers,
Yeah.
you know, that's another very good example of participatory gaps.
Yes.
So one of the things that we have always wanted to do is, you know, you want to reach, as it were, the digital extremities of our society, whether it is a household that may have children and you know, doesn't have the means and you want to help them. It could be seniors, and that's why we launched the Seniors Go Digital, and we've reached about 60,000 seniors, and working with the telcos to make not just devices available and data plans, but actually walk the journey with them.
Yes.
With our digital ambassadors, 1,000 of them deployed across the island, embedded in the community, because it gives them the confidence that it's not a one-hit deal,
Yes.
right? You're going to be here tomorrow and day after to guide me some more. Same thing with our hawkers. So we did the Hawkers Go Digital to adopt the QR code type payment solution.
Yes.
Again, same thing, 19,000 hawkers, we've covered all, I think, and more than half have adopted it. The point really being, we need to have purposeful strategies to reach out to these segments. And it has to be done in a way that fosters confidence, because the hawkers have the same question. Okay, so you guys are here today selling me this idea of a QR code payment, but tomorrow if I run into problems, what happens?
Yeah.
Right? And this is real lived issues for them. So I think overall, our focus has really been on finding, you know, you have to move from big ideas into actionable steps. And that's really what the focus has been for us over
There's
the
a
last
challenge too,
12
isn't it?
months. It has been the challenge
Yep.
because you really have to get into execution and sustained effort.
Right. Jerome, for you, I mean, picking up on what Carol said about age, and her study has also mentioned that not all youths are presumed to be savvy as well.
That's right.
So even youths can fall into a gap, isn't it? Can you comment?
So I think myself is I'm one of the culprit, right? So I think we can, if we look into what's trending today, there is Instagram, there is TikTok, right? There is WhatsApp, there is Telegram. And I mean, the way that we look at gaps, the way that I see gaps is that there has to be opportunity, right? There has to be opportunity for us to tap on. There has to also be the need for us to tap on, right? So in my case, I know I work with and communicate with business owners, and they are using WhatsApp. You know, so Telegram is an app that I use to interact with the more youth side of things and all this. But you know, that's when I find the need to come on board to Telegram, and I mean that's when, you know, I decide to come on. So I think. I mean,
Interesting. So WhatsApp's for old people, is it?
Not really to say WhatsApp's for old people, right? But to really say, I think all of us are very familiar. Yeah, all of us are actually very familiar with WhatsApp already.
Right.
Right. So these are really things that and there is adoption. So I mean, if for me to come on board to Telegram and all this, there's things for me to learn as well. Right, so there was a challenge for me, to be honest, right? To really understand and how does it benefit and to really find use in there. Yeah.
So on this point, a quick show of hands. Who uses Telegram in the room? I'll just see everybody shoot out their hands.
Yeah. So that's why I changed. Now I'm taking
see.
on. Yeah.
Okay. I better download Telegram after this. Good Lord.
Let me chime in. I just want to highlight the gaps. I think Minister talked about the gaps. Last year, at the peak of COVID period, we identified there was definitely certain segments in the community that needs more help. So Singtel as a corporate, we decided to embark on a program, and obviously financial is one part of it. We came together and we helped to raise about $2 million to help vulnerable groups. And beyond that, we look at 3 segments that we thought have needed more help beyond just financial. So the first group is actually the seniors that the minister talked about. We partner with NTUC Health and Thye Hua Kwan, where they are running a lot of senior activity centers. So we actually work with them to, firstly, of course, equip those activity centers with the right equipment, the right connections. But beyond that, because that's just hardware and service, so we got our staff to volunteer to go down to these activity centers to really give one-on-one sort of assistance to seniors who turn up at those activity centers. So we have got about 500 Singtel employees who are volunteers, really going down. And you'd be surprised, the level of digital awareness or digital competency is actually quite high. It's not just about WhatsApp and usage or using video calls. Some of them are actually asking for help to say, how am I going to e-shopping platforms? How do I, do my shopping on those platforms? So I think there's a gap, but there's also the willingness to learn and participate. But of course, because this is really requires a lot of human effort because it's one-on-one. So we are also reaching out to the community to get more volunteers. So it's not just about money, it's about time and it's about effort. So that's probably one segment. The other segment is really the SME segment. Because I think as part of the ESC, Emerging Stronger Conversation Survey, technology and digital was ranked number 6, I think, on that gaps. And we realized that the SME has a huge gap in awareness, what's available out there. In fact, there's a lot of helps and grants given by the government, and yet they could not discover it because they're so busy running their businesses that they have no time to go out. Actually, during COVID, it gave us a great opportunity, and what we did was we ran a series again of free webinars, sessions, and ambassadors reaching out to SMEs and say, we just provide a platform for people to know what's available, what's free. And of course, there are certain things that you have to pay, but that actually encouraged and helped a lot of SMEs to have taken on some of these schemes and went digital. So even as simple as converting the entire HR payroll from a paper-based to an online virtual-based software as a service. So these are some, I would say, positive examples. Again, it is grounds up. You've got to go down and reach out. We do our part. Many of these are free services that we offer, but we do hope that they will come back and once they have adopted digital, they will sign up more and take up more. And of course, the hawker as well. Right.
At this point, I've got a question coming from Zoom. Just hold that thought. I'll come back to it. Now, we're talking about gaps and also confidence level. This one is about youths. Young Singaporeans are concerned about their skills being made obsolete. So even the young are also being caught by the speed, apparently. Where should we direct our efforts? Connecting the unconnected or ensuring the skills of our youth stay fresh? Let's take the first one first. Even young people are feeling the speed and the rush of digital evolution. It's obsolete by tomorrow, I suppose, even as we talk. Minister, what's your take?
Well, I think actually, if you're a young person today, I would actually be very optimistic. And because the opportunities are enormous. And I think one of the concerns would be that what if I'm not from a tech background? Do I have a future in this tech space? I think this is the recurrent sort of concern.
Yes.
And I think many of us, even those who are already in the workforce, feel the same way. If I don't code, if I didn't do comm science or engineering, do I have a future? And the truth is, and people like Moon can talk about this a lot more, maybe Charong as well, the truth is actually, even though there's a lot more tech requirements and tech skills and so on, there is a role for a multidisciplinary approach. In fact, when you work in teams, all of us need some level of knowledge about the technology, but you don't need to be a techie to be able to participate in the digital economy because there are tech-like roles and there are complementary roles, things to do with, for example, UI, UX, user interface, etc., understanding the marketing from a digital perspective, etc., and so on. So I always say that at the end of the day, what really counts is aptitude and attitude. attitude meaning a willingness to learn and adapt, because I think even the comm science people will tell you, you know, you've gone from, you know, Fortran and whatever, today you talk about, you know, Python, etc., and things like that. I think it will, and tomorrow it may be something else again.
Absolutely.
So it keeps changing, right? And same thing with telecom technology, 3G, 4G, 5G, they're already talking about 6G and so on. So I don't think technology is going to be static.
Right.
So it's not as if you can just arrive and stay there. So the real question is attitude, willingness to learn and adapt, and aptitude, meaning a certain facility to experiment and try new things. So I think we have that, and that's what I think will be the most important thing. Being connected is actually kind of almost a basic requirement.
Right.
You know, everybody should be connected in one way or another, mobile or, you know, broadband, etc. All these things, I think I would take that as almost a given in a society like Singapore. But in terms of the ability to use it, that's where I think the skills and the attitudes come in.
Right. I mean, that's a great point, Minister. I want to open up to the room now. I mean, it's a great point to remember. You don't have to be a techie to be on a digital journey, isn't it? Does anybody want to share? Somebody from an SME or corporation, you know, who had to, I suppose, convince or persuade perhaps an older workforce? Yes, please. Can we have a microphone for the lady?
Hi, good afternoon, Minister Iswaran, as well as esteemed panelist. I'm Karen from Lions Befriender. I'm not able to share from the MSC perspective, but I'm able to share how seniors from rental flats have overcome the fear of technology. So, like Lions Befrienders, we serve more than 6,000 seniors living primarily in rental flats and on financial assistance. Now, the challenges they face, obviously, is about competency and capability. Many have little or no education. So even if we gave them access to technology, like what AIC did a few years ago, they resold their phones to the Karang-Guni because they don't use it. They don't understand the value, or they gave it away to other people. Now, come COVID, what happened? Because of the challenges they have, they also had mental health decline. So what we did in Lions Befriender was we started on the digitalization process. And over 7 months, we rolled out 5 phases of sustained digitalization. So last June, we started immediately on day 3 of post-CB. We launched the virtual befriending at the center. We helped them overcome the fear of technology. Same time, we realized it's no point having them come down to the center. But with that overcoming of fear of technology, we move into second phase. Also in June, we are fortunate to have the support of IMDA, together, of course, with Singtel and all the other players, through the deployment of smartphones. AIC also gave us smartphones, which we asked for in April last year, because we had a bunch of seniors who didn't have technology, or rather they have phones, no landlines whatsoever. With that, we gave them 24 access. Of course, Singtel sent down ambassadors. IMDA had ambassadors. We sustained, because for seniors, you have to teach them like 4 times, learn how to swipe the phone. They grew up using rotary, they're using button, and most of all, they're not educated. Now, we then went to phase 3. Also, we started in June last year. We went to the 9 public hospitals, asking to work with them on telemedicine and teleconsultation, because seniors only desire one thing at that age, besides your physiological factors, besides your homes, and your food, etc. What matters most is their health. So they have no incentive to use the phone once we go back to normal life. So we use the hospitals to come in to do telemedicine, and we did hybrid. So with that, we went into phase 4. Phase 4 now, we're using AI technology to check on their mental health. So on our own, with phase 5, we were interviewed by the media yesterday. We are moving to empower them to make sure they check in every day so that we know that they're still alive. So during the CB period, what we did at LB is, sorry, because of the mask, it's very hard to breathe and talk. So excuse me for a while. Okay, so what happened is, during CB, LB has no unknown death of seniors at all. We managed to account for all our 6,000 seniors, no death behind the doors. But with that means that moving forward as we scale, and in the event we go into another CB, we are not able to keep on sustaining at that effort. It's also very tiring. So with that means that once we put the empowerment in the hands of seniors, especially the uneducated ones, we have seen how they have transformed when they are fearful of things because they have little or no education. But once we overcome their fear of technology, because we help them with the journey, with them throughout, we show them the different measures of how it benefits them. It has to be something that they believed in. No point giving them a smartphone and then they don't use apps. They can't read and write. So the only way is to use the medicine from the hospital because they don't want to spend half a day in a hospital navigating the system, sitting down there for an hour waiting for the turn. Yeah. But this is only possible for chronic diseases, chronic conditions. So we come up with creative ways to make sure that they are sustaining the usage of technology. Even today, we are able to go out. We also make sure, at Lions Befriender, we make sure that the seniors do hybrid. So all activities is 50% physical, 50% virtual for that same senior, so that they don't lose the usage of technology. Because we don't want them to chuck away the phones. It's a wastage. And we need them to be engaged because in the event we have another CB coming, we are not able to sustain them knocking on doors because we have to search for them when they're not around. We can't find them at their homes.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, thank you for sharing. I mean, that was a really good point of supporting,
so I think Karen
ministers.
makes a very important point,
Yes,
which is that basically at the end of the day, the groups that she's described, the clients, are probably the ones that you at least expect to be able to use technology. So why were they able to do it? It's because they had a reason, they had a purpose, and that's the crux of it, right? Digitalization is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end, and that end must be visible, palpable, tangible, so that people then say, all right, I can see value proposition here for myself, makes my life better or something, and that's why I want to do it. And I think that's a key thing. Otherwise, it's a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it totally underlined Minister's point that it's, I give you a phone, but then that's it. You're left to your own devices. Because what is the last mile then? It's not just throwing a digital tool at you. And I'm going to go on to a next observation, a bit offhand, maybe a little bit cynical. Some say that digital readiness is a generational issue, which would resolve itself with time. To me, that sounds very cynical, perhaps too pragmatic for my comfort level. Carol, would you like to weigh on this one?
I think some of what we discussed earlier kind of, at least to me, show the answer to that question. I think even across the same generation, we see very differential ability, to fully use technology, to be able to navigate the online space effectively, safely, etc. Right? So, Minister talked about seniors, and yes, we, unfortunately, oftentimes when we talk about seniors, I think the common association with this group is that they are not tech savvy. They are very susceptible to misinformation and fake news. But we see that with other demographic groups as well, right? So I think kind of leading back to the earlier question just now, which asked, should we continue to dedicate resources to improve access, or should we focus on helping people upskill themselves? I don't think it's a zero-sum game, because if you look at the government's efforts, it dates back to, 1990s when we had the Singapore IT Master Plan, and I remember reading about Infocom 21, where policymakers laid out the vision for e-society, e-learning, e-government, e-commerce, and we look at where we are now in 2020, we seem to be discussing the same issues. So the implication then is, have we not made any headway? And I don't think so. I think that is a clear reflection of the fact that innovation in technology is unceasing, and it's happening at an even more rapid stage. So we are constantly playing catch up. So I think issues of access and different types of access will always be there. So I think we really need to look at, unfortunately, this also means more work, look at many different parts of the problem. So for instance, Minister gave the example of Hawkers Go Digital. I think within a short span of time, also largely thanks to the efforts of the digital ambassadors, the take-up rate is quite good, right? I think if I'm not wrong, the current adoption is about 50% of storeholders, which is 10,000 storeholders who have adopted e-payment. And we think about the rest. Why aren't the rest adopting, right? It's not just access. because clearly there's subsidies and the assistance. What are they worried about? They're worried about, some are still worried about suppliers wanting to take payment in cash. So then if we look at that, that's another part of the ecosystem that we need to deal with. How do you then work with other businesses so that they too adopt e-business, e-payment solutions? And then what's another concern? The other concern is consumers at large not adopting e-payments. So then you need another basket of work, right? Another group, a bunch of efforts, to kind of encourage that adoption. And of course, there's a big issue of fraud, which worries many people, consumers and hawkers. And here we see some good work done by private tech companies that come up with, I think, voice alerts in vernacular languages and English, so that seniors or hawkers, hear that the payment have gone through. Right,
I'll pick up on
less
challenges a
likely
bit
to do
later,
that.
Carol,
Yeah.
but let me just stick to that issue of the generation. Moon, I think you have something to add.
Yeah. I think it depends on how you see that statement. I don't think it's as cynical as it sounds.
Okay.
I would say there's two perspectives. If you take a look at it, it could be it could go away from next generation not because technology is not evolving, because I think the technology will meet us halfway. With the innovation in artificial intelligence, in all the different natural interaction with machines, the machines will come closer to us to make it easier for humans to interact with them. So therefore, if you take that view, it could. You probably have to learn lesser to interact with machines. So that is a very optimistic view of looking at it. But obviously, it could be the other way around. It will not go away because with new technology, it comes with new challenges, which could be another risk that, for example, on fraud, on cyber risk, that technology may not be able to address. Because human can then be so remote from this technology because the machine is trying to cope with us that you forgot the underlying challenges. And that raises another set of risks. And so therefore, I think it really depends on how you look at that statement.
Well, you gave me some hope. That's
I
good,
add
because
on?
I was getting a bit. Sharon, why don't you add
So
this?
I think looking at how whether digital readiness is a generational issue, I actually see it as a mindset issue, just like what Mr. Yuan actually mentioned, right? Because technology is always changing, right? So including myself, I'm always looking out for new technologies. And if we were to go back to where we are, maybe if we look forward into the future, when we are of maybe at 50s or 60s, we will be experiencing the exact same problem, right? Today it's WhatsApp, it's Telegram. Tomorrow, what would it be? Right, and that's why actually we came together, and in Singapore Computer Society we formed the IT Youth Council, right? So we actually want to be change makers. We want to encourage this mindset to continue learning, lifelong learning, and to really embed this mindset into the youth today, so that when we move into the future, we are ready for that.
It's not as if young people are in digital nirvana and older people are in digital wilderness permanently.
That's true.
I think all of us have got certain areas where we are actually well placed and certain areas we have to learn.
Right.
And I think what we have to be very careful about is not presuming that somehow just because there's a difference between being digital or tech savvy and being information savvy.
That's right.
Right? So just because you know how to use the platform doesn't mean you're a discerning user of it. And similarly, for an older generation, I think they may have the life experience to make them more discerning, but they need to pick up the tech skills. So I don't think this is one of those things where, as the generations wash through, everything is going to be normalized.
Right.
I think they will just have new and different challenges for every generation.
Thank you, sir. Now, on this point, it's interesting, just because you're not tech savvy doesn't mean you're not discerning. And there's a question that's come in on Zoom that talks a little bit about this. With increasing digitalization, one of the fears faced by seniors is fake news and scams. So it goes back to Carol's point about challenges, right? So how are our leaders stepping in to provide cybersecurity tips to help the community to be more savvy, I suppose? And I'm going to, caveat this. I don't think it's just seniors who are susceptible to fake news and scams. I mean, it is a cyber security challenge across generations, isn't it? Cheryl, maybe you can kick this off for us.
Yeah, so I think the way that I see it is that it is not only just seniors who are vulnerable to this, including ourselves, right? Scams, the way scams work, and the way the way people can actually attack us, right? There are always new innovations to it, right? And for us, we actually have to keep getting ourselves aware of this thing as well, right? So to really look into how can community and private sectors really help, I think it has to come from all walks of life, right? For us to work together to share about this. And one such example would be, during COVID-19, my parents would say, would be sharing some news online that they found, that they just share on WhatsApp, right? And what we do as who are the ones who are more digitally savvy, we help to cross-check. Is this information correct? Is this information accurate? Right, so I mean, while my parents or my uncles and aunties are sharing all this information, we cross-check with them and tell them, no, this is not true, right? So for example, the mask flip upside down, which is the correct way to wear the mask and all this. Yeah, so these were some of the examples that actually went through, and I think this is one way that we can help and we can contribute towards, resolving fake news and scams. Yeah.
Moon, do you want to chime in on how the community, besides our leaders, can?
Well, I think there's definitely a lot more we can do because the fraudsters are out there every day thinking of new ways of scamming people, right? I mean, it's a very easy target. I mean, you got a whole population to target at. And it's always having, of course, to inform the public what the latest way of the scams happen. And together with technology, and I think we work very closely with IMDA to create a series of technology sort of to minimize the risk. For example, if you receive a phone call that have a +65 sign, which is Singapore country code, it's very likely that this is a scam call because we have already created a system that says that any local call, you will never see a +65. It's just an 8-digit number. So, just don't pick up the call. That will prevent people from being scammed. So, I mean, this awareness has to be raised, right? Because there are things that we can do, but at the end, the individuals have to take some responsibility. Last year, we did a series of very light-hearted videos to educate the public. We call it Jaga Your Data. It's just to show the most common scams that are happening today. Pretending to be a service provider, asking for your information, pretending to help you with your computer, asking you to give access to them. So all these are really simple ways of educating the public what not to do. And we've garnered more than 4 million viewers on some of these videos. Really is to step up to educate and to help people know what's happening out there and not fall prey to such scams. I think you're always going to be there. In fact, probably the latest type of scam is COVID-related. This is your turn to go for your COVID vaccine. Click on this button, and once you click on it, and that's it. You got a phishing email that went through. So I think we just need to continue as a community, as corporates, and everybody to continue to inform everyone and to protect our customers, to protect our citizens that there are such scams around.
Minister, what about you as in ideally, how would the government like to partner then, I suppose, with the community? What's your ideal situation?
In terms of cybersecurity?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I think because when your digital footprint increases, the risks go in tandem. You have to accept that reality. But I think as the views that have been shared are the key thing. When you say partnering with the community, you can look at this across the board, right? Individuals, companies, system level, and then national level. And, 88888 is not a good password. Neither is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or even your birthday is not a good password. And having two-factor authentication. I mean, some basic knowledge and disciplines and not giving away information, so on. That's, I think, important. And I think this is where partnering with the private sector, but also, like our National Library Board, various ground-up initiatives from universities and so on, all trying to promote that awareness, right? And I think one thing that many people, especially younger generation, should be aware of is also what information you share about yourself on social media platforms.
That's right.
And it's not just data, but images, stories, etc. Because all of this actually become part of the risk exposure. And if you're not careful and discerning about it. So I think that, and then of course we are doing things with companies, larger players, to help enterprises take appropriate steps to protect their data and put in place safety measures. And then at the national level, our cybersecurity agency works with our big critical information infrastructure, in the telcos and the banking, in say the power sector and so on, to try and make sure that they are resilient to cyber threats and so on. But it is in the end a bit cliche, but I think it's a cliche that really applies here. Everybody has to step up.
Yep.
Because you can't sort of say that this is your responsibility and I do, because it doesn't work like that.
Right. At this point, I'd like to, there's a question on the, I'll come to you. Yes, ma'am. In green. Can I have a mic for her?
Hi, thank you very much for the rich discussion. We've spent some time talking about seniors, so I wanted to turn our attention to talking about another group, specifically children from vulnerable families. So I'm Amanda Chong. I'm the co-founder of Readable. We're a literacy non-profit, and we operate from Jalan Kukoh, which is a neighborhood with a lot of one-room flats. And what happened during circuit breaker was that there was a proliferation of digital devices within these homes because we worked with community partners so that the children will have devices for home-based learning. And now the problem that we have is that we realize that there isn't that appropriate level of perhaps parental supervision or awareness about cyber wellness and safety. And we've discovered that a lot of these children, unfortunately, they are on platforms like TikTok, and they have reported seeing, and we have seen it as well, like sexually explicit content, or we have them, really young children, 7 to 8 years old, mimicking certain kind of sexualized behaviors or dances found on TikTok, and then posting about how they do feel very lonely and they just want to be loved. And to me, that is really a minefield of potential sexual grooming cases, right? And already it's a population that's very vulnerable. And again, I go back to what Dr. Soon commented about the participation gap, right? Because a lot of the parents in these homes may not be so savvy about all of these new media platforms. In fact, myself, as a millennial, I didn't even know how TikTok worked. And I had to educate myself about how it worked in order to help kind of cope with this issue of cyber wellness. So perhaps I want to turn this, ask for your opinion on how can we, the private and the public sector and the people sectors work together to really empower families from low-income backgrounds and, in fact, all of us to cope with these new challenges in cyber wellness, especially amongst vulnerable children. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to take up this? Minister,
Everybody's looking
default.
around.
Yes.
So in the end, I get arrow.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, but I think it's a very important point that you make, because what you've exemplified is really the kind of issues that we all did. Because you can give devices, that solves one problem, it creates a new problem, right? And you therefore need to have a conscientious effort to look at it in a holistic way. So I think in this instance, because you're talking about the child having unsupervised access to all kinds of platforms and spending a lot of time and getting exposed to things that perhaps they shouldn't be exposed to. And this is why I think it's very important that the parents, especially in the case of young children, the parents need to understand what are the avenues available to you to manage your child's exposure, right? There are very simple things that are, like controls that you can put in place. This is quite apart from very crude measures like just taking the device away or restricting time. But actually, children can get around a lot of these things very easily. So actually, the most important thing is educating, but it takes time. And therefore, you need a combination of some measures that parents understand, and they know that this is part of how I manage the growth of my child as an intelligent user online. But at the same time, investing in education. And I think there was an earlier question about schools. I think schools play an important role. So it's really about a sort of an effort on all fronts. Because the challenge is that this is a very dynamic space. You say you're a millennial and you're learning TikTok. So imagine for most of us, there's TikTok. I just did my first session on Clubhouse a few days ago. And actually it was not bad. It was a pretty good thing. But my point is, now I'm trying to think about what are the challenges of something like Clubhouse. What does that mean for us in terms of the exposure of children and so on? So I think we need to stay on our toes. But it also means that even parents who may come from a more, disadvantaged background perhaps, that's where the people who are working with them have to come in. We've got corporate partners. And if I can just do a little plug, one of the things we are doing, President just launched something called the Digital for Life movement. And we're setting up a Digital for Life fund that goes with it. And the whole idea of that is really to spark a national movement ground up. So this is not about government ministries or departments. This is about people, whether they're in the people sector, in the private sector, coming up with very purposeful actions, recognizing that we all need to contribute to this more vibrant but safe digital environment for everyone. So I would encourage you to, propose ideas to us on this, because these are the things that can actually make a real impact and difference in the lives of the people you work with, for example.
Can I add on to?
Yes, Gerald? Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is really a call for startups or even organizations to come together to innovate. One observation that I noticed, right, is that there are a lot of startups that are actually solving problems, right? One such category is actually online spending, right? Because of how digital access, how we are actually we have some form of digital access today, right? Kids are actually purchasing things online, right? And right now, the way that they're doing it is they're using their parents' money. They're using their parents' cards, right? But there are actually startups who are coming together.
In-app purchases.
Yeah, there are actually startups like, for example, Zimbo, Revolt, and some other startups that are actually addressing all of these problems. And I think they can step up together to work together with communities like yourself to really look at how can we solve the problem in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to address that point as well, because I think Singtel has been working with children with disabilities for many years. That's one of our corporate philanthropy program. A few years ago, we started to partner DQ Institute to roll out a program on cyber wellness for children. And we have rolled out this into schools as well. It's really to provide support and education to students, to make sure they know how to protect themselves when they go onto the internet. You talk about all the different platforms and the risks involved. I think it's been very well received. We originally rolled out to schools with special needs, but then subsequent to that, we adapted the program together with our partner, DQ Institute, to actually roll out to mainstream schools as well. You're absolutely right. DQ stands for actually digital quotient, right? It's not about digital awareness, it's what do you do on the digital space? How do you protect yourself? Where are there's also a hotline. Actually, the hotline is not just for the students, it's actually for parents as well. What do you do when your child is being cyber bullied in school or at home? So it is, again, a lot more effort from the community, from corporates needs to step in to help raise awareness, because the parents may not know how to guide their children, because there's this knowledge gap of digital awareness as well. So I think everyone has a role to play. Being a digital service provider, internet connection provider, we do see ourselves having a heavier responsibility of providing cyber wellness to the younger generation. So therefore, we are investing in this area.
Right. I think there's another question from the floor. A microphone for the gentleman.
A few around.
Oh, there are a few. Great.
You want to take a few together?
Yes. Sorry, this gentleman first, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Kathy Teo.
Kathy.
I am the owner of an SME that was founded and based and headquartered in Singapore. My team and I also started an initiative called Bridge the Digital Divide, which is our version of social responsibility and a ground-up initiative. We started the initiative in December 1st, 2019, which was before the whole COVID mess began. And the project didn't really take off until around February or March of 2020, when our country was starting to go into different degrees of lockdown. So we had solicited a lot of donations of laptops from mainly other organizations, other corporations, as well as many individuals. Worked with a coalition, I would suppose, of different companies to actually refurbish and repair the laptop so that they are deemed to be of a functional condition, and then worked with social service organizations like Beyond Social Services, Beautiful People, to put the laptops into the hands of families and households that are economically disadvantaged and have school attending kids who definitely needed them during the home-based learning period. So I guess, we have been talking, Minister, you've been talking about aptitude and attitude, but I do want to go back to what Jennifer said at the beginning of the session, which is about access. I think we take it for granted that Singapore is an organization, a country that has very high internet penetration, that has very high mobile penetration. The fact is that there are people in our society who are left behind because they are not economically advantaged. We talked about economically vulnerable families who are living in HDB rental flats. And I've actually visited a family which had 3 primary school kids, for example, trying to debate who has to skip school and who gets to use the laptop on that day. And the second group, I guess, that has been mentioned today are the elderly people who might not be as digitally savvy. The third group, I think, that we shouldn't forget about also is the migrant workers population. Because for us, we take having a functional smartphone for granted. But the migrant workers, when they're locked down in their dormitories, when they're out at the work site, if they have a broken phone that they can't afford to have replaced, it's not so easy for them to just buy a new phone or get a functioning phone, to be able to comply with safety check-in requirements and to comply and to be able to access legitimate news, and in fact to be able to keep in touch with their family from overseas, to maintain their mental wellness and all that. So I think as we move towards Smart Nation, we do need to think about how we ensure digital inclusion for everyone in our society, because the people who are digitally excluded today will, in effect, be economically excluded in the future. So I guess with the CEO of Singtel here and with Minister here, one of the questions I wanted to ask is whether what has been done to look into universal digital access, to treat internet access as a basic utility, as we do electricity, as we do water. What is the conversation around that? In the government sector.
Thank you. That is actually one of my big asks, and you just took it right out of me. Thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Yes, so the concept of free universal access, or even the idea of a digital birthright, that concept is clearly trending very much right now. It's an important question. Minister, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. And I think Anthea, when she was in Parliament, she raised this too, and we had a good discussion on that when we were in Parliament and so on. I think basically it's a very important point. The first thing I would say is we are very, and in my ministry's mission, we are very clear that everyone should have digital access. Okay. But there is a difference between ensuring effective digital access and universal digital access. And let me explain why. You see, we've all now used the example of the family with 3 kids a few times. When you're in a lockdown situation and everybody is learning from home and working from home, the needs are very different to when you're in a kind of normal situation where actually you're going to school, going to work, but you also have sometimes a need, right? So the requirements become very different. So what we need to do is make sure that we provide the essential support that is needed. I don't think there should be any household or any child that needs it, whether it's a device or access, that should be deprived it. That should not be having it. And so we've got excellent ground-up initiatives like what you've just described from your side, Kathy. We also have another outfit called Engineering for Good, I think, and they do that too, and sort of thing, which is great. But at the same time, IMDA has this new PC program, which they in fact amped up over the period, because one of the issues was, and I think Anthea brought this up as well in Parliament, was, you can have tablets, but tablets don't help you do your homework because you need PCs or laptops and so on. So we had to, try and make those transitions and so on. So I think we can triangulate and do this better, and we've also got partners like from the private sector and the telcos in this case, for example, with devices and so on. So I think universal access in the sense of making sure everybody who needs it gets it, access to it, is something that we should be committed to. However, what form it takes is something we shouldn't be formulaic or doctrinal about. The reason is because some people say, why don't you just have every HDB flat wired up for Wi-Fi? Mm-hmm. But so first, there are cost considerations, but even leaving the cost considerations aside, today many people work off mobile, right? And mobile access may in fact be even more relevant. Mm-hmm. And Moon, you may want to weigh in on this. So when you, for example, what is more valuable to an individual? Giving you affordable mobile access, perhaps on a 5G platform, which allows you wherever you are, anywhere, anytime, because that's the kind of situation we're in now, right? Anywhere, anytime, on my terms, kind of thing. So is that better, or is Wi-Fi better? Then some people talk about the wireless at SG. Again, there's a trade-off between having these localized hotspots versus giving you this sort of broader mobile access. So these are things that we are going to have to learn and do. The principle of having access for everyone is inviolable. It's very clear. The modality to achieve it is one that we should be prepared to explore different possibilities, and also accept that some may work, some may not work, and we should be prepared to recalibrate. And in doing that, I've encouraged the fact that it's not just about IMDA or MCI or our ministries or MOE, now they're going to do laptops for all secondary school children and so on. Then the question is, why not primary school children, right? And so you need to move down that. The key thing is, it should be all hands on deck, clear about the vision, be flexible about the modality.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on what the Minister have just said. I think we just have to look at the situation a bit differently. During the circuit breaker period, where you do have a more demanding needs at the home, where you need more devices, and during normal period where you just need connections. During the circuit breaker period, we have got a program where we stepped up. NCS, one of our 100% owned subsidiary of Singtel, partner with UOB and SPH, were refurbishing a lot of laptops to actually give to students with low-income family, because they need 3, as you said, not 1. Beyond that, because they may not even have internet access in those homes, because previously they don't need to, they just do it in school. Probably there's not even enough time to lay the fiber there to turn it on. We provided a free dongle and said you use it during this period just to go to school. So I think during that period, you do have to do something special and different to cater to the needs, to make sure that no one is left behind. But beyond that, you talked about the foreign workers. Do you know, during that time, the dormitories were actually all sort of a lockdown. We had to come up with different solutions. They had money, they had phone, but they cannot do a top-up. What do you do? Because they can't get out, and there's no vendors there doing, helping them, providing their top-up cards. So we have to roll out vending machines to be placed into the dorm so that they can continue to do recharge, so that they can remain connected. So there are a lot of things that we have to do to support this sort of different communities who have the need. So on top of that, we roll out digital apps to make sure that they have bank accounts, they have money in the bank, but they don't. They are very encouraged to use digital means to top up. And I must say, the adoption rate during that period was the highest ever. We have never seen the digital adoption so high for that segment. And in fact, it has stayed very high post-circuit breaker. Now they are all so used to using it, and they carry on.
So during the circuit breaker, in fact, one of the things we worked with the telcos on was to provide mobile access for the migrant workers, because they were all going to be confined to their dorms, and they needed the data to, whether it's to communicate with their family or to access, and also providing content and so on that they could use, in their vernacular languages that would entertain them and so on. And at the same time, where it was possible physically, to also to wire it up for wireless where it's possible as well. So, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, just to build on Moon's point, is we do need to, do everything that we can, but we just need to be clear, and I just want to reinforce the point I made. The principle is clear, the goal is clear, but the way we achieve it, we need some dexterity in that.
I would like to actually add on. Yes. So I think Singapore has really come a long way to where we are today, right? The Digital for Life movement actually is a movement that came out from multiple series, Emerging Stronger. And in fact, way before that, there's Digital Readiness Council, there's Digital Readiness Network, that we really come together as GD friends, right? So all of these initiatives were really started out because I think the government really wanted to hear from the ground how it is like, and what can we do and how can we react on. And today we are at a stage whereby, there are more and more complexity, right? We have resolved one or two problems, and this one or two problems have also, introduced newer challenges for us, right? So that is where, the Digital for Life movement really comes together for organizations to voice out and to really share that there are all these problems that, you guys observe on the ground. That's when, the government can support, and if this is really a huge problem, I think we can work together with the other partners to come in to help.
I think we've got, yes.
Just make one point. I think it's quite evident that there is no shortage of efforts, right? Whether it's on the part of the government or private companies. Even I think tech companies themselves are rolling out features to try to improve the safety of the online environments on their platforms. And what Amanda said earlier, I'm a fan of Readable, right? And I see what Readable does on a regular basis, not just COVID-19, then there's engineering good. And we saw during COVID-19, personally, for me, what was really heartening to see was just this burgeoning, of ground-up efforts. So I think really, just to sum it up, right, what is really key right now is how can we, whether it's through Digital for Life or the Emerging Stronger conversations and the AFAs, right, Alliances for Action, how can we really bring different people with the same heart and mind, okay, to solve different types of problems, whether it's access or participation gap, etc., and try to upscale that. Yep. So hopefully one day we can kind of reach the kind of, we have that same reach that policymakers and agencies have, right? So that not all problems have and will be solved by the government or the public sector.
I mean, that's a great point, Carol. I mean, to the point of our topic this afternoon is leaving nobody behind. And Minister, you agree that has been so much groundswell of support, not just from the top, but really from the community as well. They've taken the initiative to help. We've got some questions on this side. Let's see. We'll start with the gentleman. Yes, there's a microphone for you.
Hi, this is Paul from SPD. I was waiting to see whether the mainstream discussion will be over, because my organization represents people with disabilities.
Could you speak into the mic a bit?
Okay, people with disabilities. So that is a very, very unique group. I think Minister knows us well. So he knows our issues, because this is a smaller group, and in Singapore we're talking about only 2-3% of disability population. So my question will be, when we are going for mass, there is always have to be mindful there is a smaller group who may not create a mass, but their needs are also equally important. So during this digital era, we are seeing two things. One, the jobs are taking different shape. And people with disabilities take long time to pick up skills and set down in a certain jobs well. And when the job change, it takes another 15, 20 years to pick up that skill. We have seen that is 1980s when our production lines all going to cheaper land somewhere. So people start to struggle. And then it becomes a social cause because they are jobless, government has to come in and support. We are going to see that trend again, that many people are dropping from employment. So where the whole country is talking about employment, employability, this is one thing happening. The second subject that need to talk, because when we are going into digital era, there is no universal language. Because today, if the banking products, our online products, if you are a visual impairment, you can't access many of these websites. So I think that is maybe slightly regulatory responsibility to make sure that all these products have the inclusivity built in. So that's the two questions.
Thank you.
Take a few more.
Yes, I think we have a few more. Yes, this lady here in white.
Hi, I'm Fanny here. I just wanted to highlight that I think it's great to hear all these ground-up initiatives that are happening. I'm heartened to hear the efforts as well. But I think we do know that there are lack of resources, being made available. That's why Daughters of Tomorrow, a charity that was actually helping women to prepare for livelihood and putting them into employment. Suddenly we had to pivot and then send out laptops, send out dongles, and doing all these different extracurricular activities, even right up to now. I think the other recommendation I want to make is actually, are we able to bring these people, those who are left behind, into the conversation? Like, can they be a part of this, this group as well, to share? Because you're talking about the digital divide, you're talking about the have and the have-nots. I think it would be great to listen from those who have nots, to hear how we can actually possibly close this gap as well, right? One of the things that we did at the earlier onset of the circuit breaker was to send out surveys to hundreds of women and to ask them, what are your challenges, basically, because we didn't want to create things and come to rescue without knowing what the challenges were on the ground. So I think the first few things was, food insecurity. They needed food. Then they also needed to know how to access those schemes that were made available because, like I said, I'm heartened to see all these rollouts of the assistance, but they didn't know how to access them. So that was one thing we had to bring our volunteers in to sort of guide them through. The other thing was how to help the children with the homework. Like the lady from Readables mentioned, a lot of them didn't even know how to help the children with the homework. And the other thing I wanted to share was mindset, right? We talk a fair bit about mindset. The question is, do people even have the mindset space to prioritize how to overcome this digital divide? We are talking about how to move to Telegram, how to move to Python and what's not. But really, I think one of the members of the community shared, and it struck a chord with me when he said, it is important to plan for the future, but it is more urgent for me to put food on the table tomorrow. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have more comments on this side. Yes, this gentleman in grey, with the grey mask. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, my name is Nicholas, and firstly, thanks, Minister and the rest of the speaker. I have a question regarding digitization for the social service agencies. So I run a social tech company, and we focus a lot on helping charities, social service agencies, and more for the social sector, in particular a volunteer management system. So my question is this, that it's not just about the mindset, but also the expectation in the mindset. So let me put into more context here. Give you an example. Let's say, you have like lots of social service agencies out there. Most of them, they do not have IT teams in their departments. Majority of them are non-tech. So when it comes to decision making, when it comes to adopting a technology, they tend to be also a bit slower, inefficient in the choices. Not because they don't want to be faster, but it's so much of a roadblock to them. Give you an example. When they need to decide out of 3 different platforms, all looks the same to them, but they don't really know what's the difference in these 3 areas. So it becomes a big problem because adopting about technology, we talk about moving forward, digitization, but this inefficiency tends to also roadblock where the vision is to create a smart nation. So my question to you is that, based on your view, how can we, from corporates, SMEs, non-profit organizations, SSS, and so forth, are able to help these organizations to create a better expectation in terms of their mindset towards digitization? Let me share with you why SSS are very important as well. I do understand that that lots of funding grants are given to them to try to drive adoption. But one of the biggest gaps is that most of the people that I know in the sector, they tend not to see that the corporates or even the non-corporate people sympathize the difficulty they are facing, especially when it comes to the COVID situation. So when we talk about technology, digitization, most of them felt that, this is too much for me. My important goal as a non-profit or as a SSA is to help the beneficiaries, and that's the priority and the existence of them. So if we want to help these people to upskill themselves, improve their capacity, how should we approach this? And what's the actions to step forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to give this a crack?
We're going to take any more, or there's quite a few here?
Oh, it's a long one. Okay, we'll take one more, perhaps, there.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Johan from Engineering Good.
Oh.
Thank you for, now you can put a face to half a face to the organization. Thanks everyone for their thoughts, and I'm very heartened that there's so many of us around to try and move not only the conversation but the action forward. I think that there's one concern I have, which is that we are assuming a situation of perfect knowledge, and the people know that they need the education and the devices and the access. This is not the case. It's very simple when it comes to the bottom of the Maslow's pyramid. If you're hungry, you know you're hungry. But we have cases where children go without devices because the parent, and they can just share their laptops with their cousins. They can do their home-based learning on their phones. Is this sufficient? Is this what we want? We have a case where the kid gets to do the home-based learning after midnight because the neighbor comes back home, puts a table outside their house, and lends their laptop out at 1 a.m. And then the kid does their homework then. And the parent is, or rather the caregiver in that sense, is comfortable with it. This is the way it is, and the kid is doing their homework and they're fine, And I think that there has to be some active policy or active action to try and get people on board, because we've seen the effects of COVID on digitalization. And this is not going to end here. There will be digital currency. Can you imagine if not everybody has a digital wallet? How are you going to move forward there? Right? So I think that there has to be some level of active citizenry, active outreach to get everybody on board, because not everybody knows that their kids are going to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there is.
Yes. Maybe to that gentleman's point about the lack of support, maybe we'll talk a bit about that first.
Yeah, so I think, quite a lot of ground. First of all, thank you very much, everyone. I think you speak from hands-on experience and a deep interest and concern. I think that's a great starting point, because it would be far worse if we didn't care. I think we all care, we're all doing something about it, and we want to do better. I think that's a good way to go. I think your point about social service organizations, I think that's a very important point, because it's not everything we just talked about in that economic context applies equally in many ways to social service organizations, voluntary welfare organizations. And actually, one of the things that we are keen to do is to explore with NCSS how we can do this. So, we started something like, we've got pre-approved solutions, right? actually many of these can be used by social service organizations. Question is, do they know how to use it, prioritization and so on. I would say actually in most of these organizations, in their boards or welfare, a volunteer group, it shouldn't be difficult, but it should become a norm that they have IT people to help them. Otherwise, I agree, it's very hard to navigate and make the choices, right? But we're also trying to see how we can work with, for example, IMDA is, some discussion with NCSS and so on, whether at the NCSS level they can start looking at this so that you can bring about. So NCSS is like, I don't want to make too fine a point on it, but it's like the trade association and chamber for the social services sector, right? So let's see whether there's something we can do there. But I would welcome ground-up ideas on this. And in fact, part of this Digital for Life movement effort is really with that in mind. We see how we can also help the social services sector unleash. I don't want to get into all of them because I'm sure others have comments, but I would make the point on, persons with disability. I agree with you. This is something, see, the irony is, in many ways, the technology and digitalization is actually leveling the playing field more. For example, older people can do a lot more things with the help of technology and digitalization, things that were not available before, and therefore it opens new opportunities. Same thing with people with disability, but who are able to adapt to the technology. I think new opportunities unlock. But your point, and I had a conversation with someone before about this, someone is visually impaired, so how does it work? So we have to think about, voice to text, text to voice, and then how do you adapt this and so on. These are all areas that need to be worked on. Can we mandate it? We can. I think it's quite challenging because as in every technology, every solution provider must have something that addresses this. I think it'll be a very limiting thing to do, quite frankly. But the saving grace in this is there's so many technology solutions coming on precisely to address a lot of this. And my own view is I think we need to work with the larger technology ecosystem to provide solutions. So on the whole, I would say it is a more inclusive force than an exclusive force, digitalization. But we will need to address some of these specific niche parts. And that's where working with partners makes a big difference. Maybe I'll stop there and let some of the others take
We
some
have
of the
time for,
other
I suppose,
things.
one more comment, Carol, and before I wrap up with my last question. 90 minutes has flown by, so I think we might need to extend another hour. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think I'll speak to Johan's question, and if I get it correctly, is how do we help people who don't know what they need, right? Get that, right? Figure out that. One way to think about this, and it's something that we haven't had the chance to discuss, is the possibility of setting up, say, an essential digital skills framework. Something that I think it's currently being looked at in the UK context. So when we talk about jobs, for instance, right, there's what we call the generic and the basic digital skills, like word processing, developing presentations, sending emails, and you have the more advanced, high-order digital skills for work, like how do you work with digital marketing, cloud computing, AI, etc. So there may be, I think, a fair bit to think about and to consider, putting together a comprehensive, stackable digital skills framework. So I believe the UK government is currently in the process of exploring working with schools and training providers to try to roll out the framework and even come up with an essential digital skills qualification. So then that may kind of bring everybody together regardless of the starting point they're at.
So on that note, I have to ask one last question of each of you. 30 seconds, that's all we have. To our topic of leaving nobody behind in the post-COVID world that the digital tsunami has unleashed on us. What is your one biggest hope or fear of then leaving nobody behind in this time of transformation and changes? One biggest hope or fear of leaving nobody behind. Gerald, maybe you want to start this, and I'll leave the last word for Minister.
Okay. Yeah, so I think my biggest hope is really that we are able to galvanize the entire community together, right? Because that is when innovation can happen, that's when partnerships can happen, right? And I think the resources that all of us have are scarce, and that together we can really form, we can really drive or bridge the gap that we have actually discussed today, right? That is really my biggest hope, because when we achieve that, we can move on to the next level, right? Singapore can move on to the next level. My biggest fear is actually when the public sector stops leading, or actually in a way stops being an enabler for this, right? What I mean by that, so the Digital for Life movement and how it came about today happened because the government was, the government drove this, right? While there are limited resources from the public sector as well, right? But I think today where we are, there is still a need for the public sector to continue to drive this. And if we stop doing that, you know, the others might catch up. And that's the way, that's my biggest fear.
Okay, Carol.
I think my biggest fear is also my biggest hope. So fear is we may unwittingly miss out those who are invisible or less visible. So what the gentleman mentioned about PWDs, so simple case of safe entry codes that we all take for granted because we have no problem raising our arms. I think people with spinal muscular dystrophy have a problem with that, right? But I think my hope is, what I'm seeing is encouraging, that there are so many efforts from various sectors. So the big question is, how can we maybe bring everybody together to avoid duplication of efforts and to maximize the resources and the energies that we have?
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah. Well, I guess the biggest fear I have is, you know, everyone is taking a wait and see approach and let the government do all the work. As we can hear from today, there's a lot of activities that's going on. The question is, how do we reach out to the people who are unaware? And my biggest hope is for everyone, and government, enterprise, NGOs, communities, to lean in. Everyone can do something about it. And if everyone stepped in and leaned in to do something about it, we'll get there faster.
Last word, Minister.
So everybody has hope and fear, so I have to do hope and fear too.
Yes, you do.
So I think hope, you know, I would say what I think all of us want to see is a digital future which is vibrant, which is safe, which is inclusive and rich with opportunities for everyone. And I think that's what all of us are striving for. My biggest fear or concern is that we get complacent, that somehow we think that we have arrived, whether as a whole or as segments of society, because I think as long as we are not complacent and we are clear that this is not a destination but a journey that we will have to continue to travel, I think then we'll be all right. And that is, I think, the most important thing that we have to keep an eye on.
And on that note, that's all the time we have for today. A big thank you then to all our panelists for their thoughts. A big thank you to you two for all your questions, all your stories, all your experiences. Thank you for sharing. It has certainly added to the richness of the conversation. Our next discussion is this evening, where Minister in charge of Smart Nation, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, will join me for a fireside chat on his reflections in the post-COVID world and what does it mean for our journey towards a smart nation. Be sure to tune in then at 7:30 tonight. There's a QR code on your screens flashing now, and we'd love to hear more about your thoughts, your feedback about the discussion, also more ideas of how we can move ahead together in our Smart Nation journey. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.